Imagine a world where men stepped up and answered God's call to reach their full potential. Imagine a world where men put their faith and trust in God unwaveringly and without qualification. Imagine a world where men lived out God's purpose for them in everything they do. It's Not My Credit to Take explores the awe and wonder of how God shows up in the lives of strong, principled Christian men from all walks of life. Get ready to laugh, to cry, and to be transformed. I'm your host, Dr. Ed Slover, faithful husband, loving father, loyal friend, and unapologetically Christian. Welcome to the It's Not My Credit to Take podcast.
Hey, Kyle. How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for taking time to have this conversation. My guest today is Kyle Gillette. As the son of a farmer, he studied to become a physical therapist at Cal Polytechnic, and shortly after school, he was introduced to a faith-based men's group that changed his personal and professional trajectory. His experiences as a father, husband, entrepreneur, along with a lifelong fascination with psychology and human behavior, led him to the path of professional coaching. Kyle is a four-time business owner and current owner of Blue Shirt Coaching, an organization that helps business owners of faith build better systems, empower their teams, grow their leadership, and increase revenue and profits through next-level accountability using the Blue Shirt Leadership Framework. He's also the author of Right Now Leadership, a four-part framework for today's leader, which goes on sale September 15th. When not coaching or producing content, Kyle is out hiking, mountain biking, or hanging with his wife of 14 years and his 3 children. Kyle, welcome to the It's Not My Credit to Take podcast.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. I sound like I'm something special when you read it off all like that.
You definitely accomplished a lot. And as I was putting this together, I loved reading A Lifelong Fascination with Psychology and Human Behavior because, like you, I have a lifelong fascination with psychology and human behavior. And I wanted to ask you, are you familiar with the Muppets?
Little bit, yeah.
Little bit familiar with the Muppets. So this is going to date me a little bit. I remember growing up watching the Muppets on network television, and one of the characters was named Beaker. And he worked in a laboratory, and the only thing he would say was me, 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 me. But I remember seeing this meme once that I wanted to share with you. It had Beaker's face, and it said, trying to understand human behaviors like trying to smell the number 9.
Mm.
And it's such a crack up because it's so true. Do you agree with Beaker's sentiment?
Yeah, that's pretty insightful, really. I mean, you can get a little bit of a taste, a little bit of an understanding, maybe a few milliliters in the beaker of understanding of what human behavior is. But yeah, to truly get it, I can't even understand my own behavior, let alone anybody else's, right? But at least I want to try to get a better idea of it.
Yeah. Yeah, very good. So tell us a little bit about your background and how you ended up now the owner of Blue Shirt Coaching.
Yeah, so like the bio said, grew up on an orange farm in Central Valley of California, and I remember I think it was like my sophomore year of high school, and my dad had me pruning the orange trees. And in the Central Valley, it's 100 degrees for most of summer, 105, 110 on the real hot days. And so I was out there manually pruning orange trees because we had actually burnt the trees with some chemicals. And so I had to cut off the skirts of the orange tree so that it didn't have the dead wood on the bottom of it. And I had 10 acres of it that I was supposed to do over the course of a summer. That's a lot of acres of trees, and you're just going down the rows and pruning and pruning and pruning. So it drove me nuts. I mean, literally, it drove me nuts. And I remember walking outside one morning, it was probably about 5:30 in the morning, and walked past, we had 2 barns on the property, walked past the first barn, which had a pool next to it, opened the wooden gate to go out to the rest of the property. And I slammed the gate, and I'm sure I yelled the F word. And I said, I effing hate this. And I broke the gate, and I was just beside myself. And I said it loud enough that I knew my dad inside the house could hear me. And then I grabbed, the pruning shears and went to work. And then he came around later that day, and we had a conversation. And it was a big catalyst for me because the way my dad handled it was really good. But it also was a point of going, I don't want to do this. This isn't my future. I don't want to be a farmer. And it was a lot of other things that were building up, and it had nothing to do with my dad. It had everything to do with like kind of who I am. And I was really dramatic about it because I'm kind of a dramatic person sometimes. But that was a big shift for me, having that experience, and then my dad handling it really well and giving me new responsibilities, but also still having to do the work. So that was the very beginning of shifting towards people. And then when I went to college, that was kinesiology, which was physical therapy. But then I recognized, partly through an externship, that wasn't for me either. I loved what the doctor was doing, but it wasn't a fit for me. And then I got invited to join a men's mentoring program after going on a missions trip. One of the guys that was part of the men's mentoring program invited me to interview. And I could tell a longer version of this part of the story, but ultimately I said yes and ended up being there for 9.5 years. And that was really the foundational education piece of what I'm doing now with my coaching clients.
Can you talk a little bit about how your dad handled that situation? Because I know, as a father of two teenage girls, I'd like to think that my approach, particularly when there's anything resembling conflict, has improved. But I grew up in a space where my dad didn't say anything unless he thought it improved the silence. And if he would have observed me doing anything resembling what you did, he would have spoke up, and I would have seen the point of his index finger, and he would have completely shut it down. And that's
Mhm.
no indictment of my father. That's just how he would have done it. How did your dad handle you in that moment?
Yeah, he always drove a white F-150, and he still does. And so I remember him pulling around the house, and I knew what was going to happen. I knew we were going to have this conversation. So he pulled around the house, around the fence, right to kind of where I slammed the gate. And I think I had been coming back up for my break. And so he knew when the break was going to happen. And so we had the conversation. And I remember him being real calm. He was in his truck, real calm, and asking me what was going on, wanted to get my perspective on why I was so pissed off. And I don't remember the exact words by any means, but the sentiment was, I care that you're really irritated about this, but I also care that you do the work still. And I'm going to help you figure out how to do both those things. I'm going to help you figure out how to deal with it. I'm going to help you figure out how to do the work anyway, because I don't care if you think it's hot and boring. I want you to do the work, but I also want to honor that you're really frustrated with this. And ultimately, I finished the work that day and the rest of the summer, but also pivoted into some other responsibilities. So he took into consideration my experience, but also didn't give me slack at the same time. So it was a really good combo. Left with a really good sentiment in my head and heart about the situation for sure.
So you have that, which sounds like a profound experience. You pivoted your personal and professional life away from physical therapy, kinesiology, to ministry, and now you're in the professional coaching space. What have you? What have those moments taught you, and how have you been able to apply that working with faith-based business owners and leaders?
Yeah, the first couple of things that come to mind are tell God what you want, and be brave and bold about it. Be specific and tell God what you want. And part of leaving that men's mentoring program, it was for guys 18 to 25 years old, and they were lost in life, stuck, struggling. Lots of them had drug and alcohol struggles. It wasn't a rehab, but we helped them to get their lives back on track. And they went through a 6-month program and process, sometimes longer than that. And they built what we called, it was a life map, and they followed that life map. Well, I'm there. I needed my own life map as well. And so I was very fortunate to have a mentor there for 9.5 years, that every Tuesday we'd meet for lunch for an hour and a half. And he would mentor me through the different roles that I had in the program. And he happened to be a serial entrepreneur, 30 plus businesses, multimillionaire, very successful, retired in his early 50s. And then he just poured into other young men, including myself. So when I got to the point where we got married, my wife and I got married, then we had our first kid, then our second kid, it was time to make a decision about where we're going to go. We want to be by grandparents, and nobody was in San Luis Obispo. And so my specific prayer was, once we decided to come up to the Pacific Northwest, it was, God, if I'm going to move up to the Pacific Northwest, I want to have as much of an impact on people or more that I did here at the Alpha Academy up in the Pacific Northwest. And so that was my prayer. That was my specific request. And after about 3 years of doing some ministry stuff through a church, which was HR, and then getting introduced to a couple other things, I recognized that my best fit for a deep impact would be coaching business owners so that they can be, in a way, discipling, so that they can be, in a way, impacting their employees very specifically and deeply because of what their role is in their lives. I mean, it's their livelihood in a lot of ways that these business owners are providing. And so I went, that's what I could do. And then I went for it, and it's been a blast. It's been hard and it's been worth it though. So that's the kind of the path that I went down.
I love the idea of business as ministry and being unapologetic about being, a faith-based owner and faith-based, leader in a world that does not invite that, as you know. How are you able to help business owners and leaders really ground in their faith at work, knowing that the secular world doesn't want to anything to do with religion or spirituality or faith in the workplace?
Yeah, two simple things that really are fundamental to staying grounded. One is we need to have God on our hearts and minds throughout the day. And so that really is as simple as creating these little cues in your day that say, oh yeah, this is the time to pray. This is when I need to pray. And for me and for other clients, what I recommend is between meetings, because it's that break point where you're going, okay, I have this meeting and I want to pray to prepare for it. And then when the meeting's over, you can pray afterward. And then you have your next meeting, you pray before that meeting, and so on and so forth. And business owners constantly have meetings. So it's this perfect cue or trigger, or whatever you want to call it, to get you to pray and to get you to keep God in the forefront of your mind. So that's a very simple thing that really helps. And then also on Monday mornings, I highly recommend a CEO meeting every Monday morning. And CEO stands for Chief Earthly Officer, which is me, right? You're the Chief Earthly Officer of your business. I'm one of mine, but the real CEO is Jesus. And so what I encourage people to do, and not a lot of people take this advice, which is a little frustrating, but you can't make people do anything. But what I encourage people to do is every Monday morning at 8 a.m., from 8 a.m. to 8:30, have your real CEO meeting where you're praying through things about your business with God, asking questions, waiting for his responses, and just being present with him. And this is not your devotional time. This is different. This is devoting time around your business towards him on Monday mornings. So those are very practical things that we can do to help stay grounded in being with God. And a third one, and then I'll shut up. A third one is I have a reminder on my phone now that reminds me to feel my feet on the ground or feel my feet. And it sounds funny, but basically it gets you present. If you're aware of what's going on with your feet, you're present. And the reason behind this is God is not a God of the past or the future. He's a God of right now, of the present. And so if I'm aware of my feet, I'm present, which means then I can be tuned back into what God has to say to me or whatever wisdom he has to dump on me or whatever his will is in the moment. And it seems a little silly, but it's one of those cues that works also.
Love all of that. And as you mentioned, they really are practical things you can do that aren't seemingly incremental to what we're already doing. Right? You're going to leave the meeting and go back to your office or go to the next meeting. So that's not incremental time. And I love it when we're able to do that. I also, the older I've gotten, have sort of lived by the credo that when there's no downside to doing something, we should probably do that thing.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
It seems self-evident, but yet, let's say when it comes to health and fitness, everyone knows the benefit. There's really no downside to it, and yet there are still plenty of people that don't do that. I want to go back just a second. You referenced that mentor in your life. If you were speaking to a young man, how would you describe the importance of having a strong male mentor presence in their life?
Yeah, I mean, I've fortunately been mentored since I was, a baby because my dad mentored me up through, he's still my mentor, of course, but like I've been really fortunate to have that. And then in college, I was mentored by upperclassmen. And then afterwards, this gentleman, Jack, mentored me, and I'm currently being mentored also. So to me, I would not be the man I am if it weren't for that mentorship, period, in every step of the way, whether it was in the college time, post college, or now. I would not be the man I am without it. So to me, the encouragement to the 15-year-old, the 20-year-old to get a mentor would be, you're going to be a better man if you receive mentorship. You're going to find a deeper level of discipleship with Jesus if you receive a mentor that is a believer, of course. And that is worth every hour of time that you spend with him. Not to mention, you're going to find a friend that is an advocate for you in ways that nobody else could possibly be. Because when you find that true mentor, when you're 20 years old and you have a true mentor in your life that's pouring into you unselfishly, there is nothing like it. You can't touch that in terms of impact on your heart and your spirit. And so it's 100% worth that time commitment. And even if it's hard, even if you have to drive a long ways or it's complicated to make it work, it's 100% worth that time.
Yeah. And you have to show up with
Yeah.
humility and courage in those moments, because you and I know this, having had mentors throughout our lives. There are those moments where the mentor will metaphorically grab your face mask,
Yeah. Yeah.
pull things out of your blind spot. And it's like, in my experience, I'm like, upon reflection, I'm like, why didn't that wreck the relationship? And
Yeah.
it occurs to me that one of the primary reasons, and I want to get your take on this, at least for me, was I believed that mentor had my best interest in mind, and because of that, I trusted them and I trusted their judgment. What's your general assessment of that?
Yeah, when I was working so the Alpha Academy is the name of the men's mentoring program I was a part of, and it still exists. And we, I should say, ran a pet resort to support the program, right? So it was underneath the umbrella of the nonprofit, and the pet resort made it so that any student can come in and be there for free. So my job when I was part of the program for, I think, 3.5 years was to run the pet resort. And so that was a real blitz of learning business, which was awesome. But part of it was also interacting with the students that were part of the program and teaching classes to them and hanging out with them outside of the property. It was a 20-acre property in San Luis Obispo. And I remember one day I'd gone to a burger joint with one of the students that had finished the program, and we were just celebrating his birthday. It was me and then like 2 or 3 other people were celebrating his birthday. And I went ahead and ordered a beer because I was of age and I wanted a beer, right? I wanted a beer. And so then it comes back around to my mentor, to Jack, that's what happened. Well, Jesse's an alcoholic. Right. So I'm at this bar, this sports bar, with him and a few of his friends drinking a beer. And I can't remember whether he had one or not. He probably did. So he pulls up to me, again, a truck story. He pulls up to me in his Titan, his V8 Titan, and he like points at me as he's leaving the property, and I'm walking towards the daycare area. And he points towards me, and he rolls down the window and he does this kind of come hither finger thing. And
For those of you who aren't watching this on YouTube, that is the universal sign of index finger point, palm up, come over here.
yep. And I was like, my stomach dropped. I'm like, oh crap,
Yeah.
I'm in trouble. And so I walked over, and he says, don't ever do that again. And I'm like, what are you talking? In my head, I'm going, what is he talking about? And he said it that sternly, maybe even more sternly. And then he described what I did and how stupid it was. And he literally told me that was stupid. Why would you do that? Do you realize that Jesse ABC? And I was like, I'm sorry. And it was a big shift for me, not in the relationship with him in any negative way. I mean, for me, it was like a deepening, just like you were saying, when they correct you because they have all good intention for you, that it was totally okay. And I took it. I took it completely, and it hit me hard, and it made sense. And I didn't make a mistake like that again. And I haven't since with anybody that I know that struggles with whatever sort of addictions they have, or at least I hope I haven't made that mistake again. So it was a wonderful moment. But it was a tough feedback moment. But that's what a mentor can do for you when they build up that equity of relationship because they pour into you consistently.
That's such a great way to say that, building equity in the relationship. I do want to pause here and call out for the listeners that may not know what a burger joint
Oh,
is.
sorry.
A burger joint in the world of Kyle Gillette and myself is a restaurant. And in the event you would ever hear someone that is over the age of 30 or 35 reference joint, that's what that is. So Kyle, I figured that we want to clarify that so no
Right.
one is confused.
We're not talking about pot.
No, we're not talking about pot, or as the kids know it as 420. It's
Oh,
actually it's
okay.
given a number for some strange reason. I'm curious because you've mentioned God and faith throughout our conversation thus far. Did you grow up in a Christian home, or how did you come to know Jesus?
Oh, yeah, that's a fun story. So my family now, I believe, is Christian, and that's a cool story in of itself too. But we had Christian values, I would say. And now I didn't live them out, especially in high school. I didn't live them out. You know, I was about girls in high school, that's for sure. But my salvation story is really is it's really neat. I had friends in high school that invited me to go to church. And so I wanted to hang out with them, and the church was a cool church. It was fun. So we went and did fun things and had good youth groups, and I had a good time. And one every spring they went to Mexico, to Ensenada, Mexico for a missions trip. And by this time I was a sophomore in high school, and I knew that salvation required me to realize that I was a sinner. And so I went on the trip not having been saved, but understanding kind of a little bit of the theology of what the gospel is and what it means to be saved. And my girlfriend at the time was supposed to go on the trip. And so I thought, perfect. I'm gonna go on this trip. I'll make out with my girlfriend in Mexico and I'll do some good and I can talk about that kind of thing. Well, God had different plans. He's like, nope, your girlfriend's not going. So she didn't go. I ended up going still. And our role there was to paint a church. So we painted the church during the day, and then in the evening we'd go into this small room that could fit 75 people. And it was pretty tight. It was like the size of I don't know how to describe it, but it was pretty tight. You know, there's a lot of people. So it was kind of a cool atmosphere because there's so many people in this tight space and we're all intentionally worshiping God. There's a band up front. It's about there's 3 members, and they sang the same songs over and over again because apparently they didn't have a good repertoire, which was perfect for me because I didn't know too many songs. So I got them memorized. And about 3/4 of the room was a wrestling mat, a blue wrestling mat. And I remember it was Friday night, and every night prior to this, I was praying, God, forgive me for my sins. God, forgive me for my sins. Forgive me for my sins. Every night I was praying that. And Friday night came around, and I'm going, God, this is your last chance because we're leaving. This is your last chance to forgive me for my sins. And I was praying and praying and praying. And then the worship leader asked everybody to be quiet and just to listen for God's voice. And so I don't know how many seconds or minutes it was, but I was real quiet and I noticed some people got down on their knees. And so I did the same. And I remember being on my knees, looking down at that blue wrestling mat. And then someone screamed, Jesus, like that. And I had been praying, forgive me for my sins, forgive me for my sins. And then that person screamed that. I felt the Spirit come over me. And then I heard, in whatever audible way, I said, forgive me for my sins. And then the voice said, I do forgive you. You need to accept the forgiveness. And so it was in that moment that I went, oh, and I accepted the forgiveness and began my repenting journey at that point. And it was at that moment that, you know, I really was saved. And I was a broken man for probably a half hour. I was just crying and weeping because I was in the middle of sexual sin. I was in the middle of a lot of pornography struggles. There's a lot of stuff going on that was a mess. And so I was being freed of that is ultimately what was happening because the Spirit was in me and like those sins are gone. And that's when 16 years old, that was the moment for me when my faith journey really began.
This idea of accepting the forgiveness coupled with the Holy Spirit filling you up makes me think about, is the acceptance an acceptance that God out there, God external forgave you? Or was it more of an acceptance of being intimately connected with the Holy Spirit, and we in many ways are expressions of that, and it's almost a forgiveness of ourselves? How do you internalize that idea?
Yeah, I mean, and I think what happened in that moment was I wasn't letting him in. I didn't want to let go of my sins. And so I kept on saying, forgive me, forgive me, forgive me. But I wasn't really wanting to stop the sin. I wanted to live in it, but be forgiven still. Right. And so when I heard his voice say, I need to accept the forgiveness, that was the moment where my heart said, okay, I'm going to stop. I'm going to try to stop, because I didn't stop because I'm a human and I struggled. But that really, truly was the moment where everything shifted, literally, like salvation happened. But then the way my heart felt about sin completely changed in a way that I actually took action on it, started to change things.
Got it. That's helpful. I want to switch gears just a little bit, because a number of years ago, you were involved in a motorcycle accident. How did that experience reinforce your faith, in God? You know, in addition to making sure that if you ever ride a motorcycle again, that you don't ride it exactly the way you did it. So, can you describe that experience?
Yeah, I had a Harley Sportster at the time. It was an 883, so fairly fast bike, not crazy fast, not crazy big or anything. But I had just started riding maybe 3 or 4 months earlier, and I had buddies that had sports bikes and sport touring bikes, and so they were riding pretty fast and doing all this leaning and going kind of aggressive, and so I was copying them. And there was a development in close to where I lived at the time. And if anybody's familiar with Pismo Beach, I want you to, if you're not, just imagine a beach that sprawls for like 10 miles in both directions, just absolutely gorgeous. And I was going to be able to go up this hill and see that view, just beautiful view of the coast, of the West Coast. And then the development had perfect asphalt, no houses, none of the infrastructure was in besides the road. And so I found it and went up it. But the way it worked was it had asphalt up right up to the edge to a curb that was, curbs like on a sidewalk. And so I cruised up through the area. It took a few minutes to get all the way to the top, hung out, enjoyed the view. I'll say I prayed. I'm not sure if I did or not, but I got up there and I just enjoyed the view, and then hopped back on my bike and started cruising back down. And I was going 50 miles an hour when I realized that what I thought was just a hill that was straight, that I could go up and it would slow me down and then go down the hill and take the curves and everything, was actually a curved hill. And when I realized it was a curved hill, somehow I looked at my speedometer and realized how fast I was going, slammed the brakes, locked everything up, and I hit the curb at around 30 miles an hour and flew through the air 30 feet. And this was the original property was pasture land. So I'm surrounded by green grass and barbed wire fence. And so I fly through the air and my legs wrap up into the barbed wire fence. And that actually, I think, really saved me from injury because it cushioned my fall, because the fence is like a spring essentially.
Yeah.
And in that way, got all tangled up in it, smashed my face on the ground, knocked me out, concussed me. And I wake up and my motorcycle's 15 inches from my face. Like the
Oh, wow.
motor of the motorcycle is 15 inches from my head. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm not broken. My neck's not broken. I didn't get run over by my bike. And I still don't know why I didn't, but I didn't. And so I untangle my legs and I sit there and all I want to do is go to sleep because I'm concussed. And somehow miraculously, I didn't see the truck before, but there's this truck coming down with a load of wood in the back, and they load me up and take me back home. And I refused to go to the hospital at first. Then my wife, who's a nurse, is like, "No, dude, you're going to the hospital." So I go to the hospital. But as I'm driving back, as I'm riding back with these guys in the truck, I'm realizing just, wow, like I was spared. There's something going on here. There's a reason that I'm okay. I mean, I wasn't even hardly injured at all. I have scars in my shin from the barbed wire fence, but that's it. That's the only remnants of the accident. And so that was huge in the moment to recognize that God was protecting me. And like, did he bring an angel to like grab my leg in midair and slow me down? Or I don't know what happened. But then in
Yeah.
retrospect, many years later, I realized that that event is connected to what I'm supposed to do in my business world and in my family and all those things. Because at that time we didn't have any kids, we were just boyfriend and girlfriend, and so there was a lot more things for me to do in my life, a lot more people to hear of the gospel, a lot more people to be touched by my life through Jesus. And so, in kind of this weird retrospect, it's helped me to recognize how precious God sees, how precious He sees me, as His child, and that He protected me.
Kyle, I have to level with you. Every part of your story all reinforces my wife's position to not let me get a motorcycle. I've been slowly wearing her down, and she supports me getting this midlife enlightenment, as I call it. For those of you who can't see it on YouTube, I'm working on a sleeve tattoo, and I've been working on her, Kyle, about getting a motorcycle, and she's having none of it. And your story really undermines my plight. So thank you for that.
Well, I have a solution. My girlfriend, now wife, was the same, and then I'm like, well, I'll get a dirt bike, and then that was the in between solution, because you ride it on dirt and you're so much more geared up when you ride a dirt bike. So that's your next argument with your next debate point with your wife. But for real, I mean, dirt bikes are, in my opinion, even more fun than a road bike. So, but we digress.
We definitely digress. I referenced in the opening that you've authored a book, Right Now Leadership, a 4-part framework for today's leader. Can you talk about what inspired you to write that? Because writing a book is a pretty significant undertaking. And what's the general message or essence of the book?
Yeah, so Right Now Leadership is actually, it's interesting. It's version 2 of a book that I wrote, that I published, and then got ripped from the shelves because I got bullied by a monster company, which I won't mention the name. And so they claimed all kinds of trademark stuff, and I just got bullied. And so I've had to republish. And the original version went number 1 in like 5 different categories. So it did really well. And so I had to pivot and change the name and kind of adjust the interior. But the original heart behind the book was, I created a framework, which is called Blue now, which is be a self-aware leader, lead with accountability, use a growth mindset, and empower others. And this is the coaching framework that I use with my clients. It's like I help them go through, it's really a cycle of going through that cycle of those 4 things. And over time I went, well, there's a formula here. There's a process here. And I started to write down the mindsets and habits that are tied to each of those 4 pillars, and discovered that there's 5 mindsets and 5 habits to each of the pillars, and went, wait, maybe I could put some stories in here, some anecdotes, some metaphors, and started to write it. And then eventually it became a book. And one of the main hearts behind it is God gave me a vision when I was driving my car home from some networking event or whatever. I'd been praying a long time about, God, what's the vision that you have for my business? I really want to know what it is. And He finally, keep seeking, keep knocking, and be that annoying friend that finally got answers. And He answered, and He said, I want you to help thousands of business owners shift their mindsets and habits so I can transform their hearts. And that became the catalyst for me of, okay, how do I help leaders become the leaders they're meant to be, so that God can transform their hearts, right? Well, mindsets and habits are in the book. There's some scripture in there and some sentiment about that in there, and God can transform their hearts through it. So that's the original intention of the book. And I'm excited for the pivot, because the pivot is really powerful, because I've realized that leadership is right now. Leadership isn't yesterday or tomorrow. Leadership is right now, in this exact moment. Just like we need to live in this exact moment with Jesus, like that's the only time we have, is right now in this moment, to be living for Him. And it's the same thing as leader. We need to live right now in this moment for Him. And any of the mindsets and habits that I write about in the book, you can apply right now. You can start to use them right now. And that shift in your leadership will make big changes in you and in your business. And the hope is, through those changes, that God is moving in their heart as well.
That's so good. We really live in a state of perpetual present, or
Yeah.
perceptual or perpetual presence. And I love how you said that leadership is right now, and especially knowing that leadership's relational.
Hmm.
And it ties back to our conversation earlier with regard to mentorship, that when someone willingly follows us, they do so because they believe we have their best interest in mind and they trust us for it. It's not an easy it's not easy to get there, though, especially in the business world, where so many individuals have been burned by really toxic managers and supervisors. For that individual, can you give us a glimpse of what one mindset or one habit you might use to help them overcome that?
Yeah. So the employee is struggling with trusting their supervisor, their business owner. Yeah. Empowerment is the angle there, of course. And when you think of empowerment, I kind of have this 4-part process to empowering people. And so I'll briefly go over it. And I want you to imagine you're in a movie theater, and what's the most recent movie that you watched that you were just enthralled by? You absolutely loved it.
Probably Avengers Endgame
Okay.
was certainly the last time I saw a movie in the theater. It's been that long.
Okay. So when you were watching Avengers Endgame, or for the listeners, think about whatever movie you're watching, you're on the edge of your seat. You're wrapped with attention. You're engaged. All your senses are engaged as highly as possible, right? And so you're fascinated. You're fascinated by this movie. To empower someone, I think we need to start with that. We need to start with the assumption that this person is fascinating and that you're riveted by who they are, what they're about, what their story is. Whether that story is good, bad, ugly, or indifferent, we're riveted by that person because they're a son or a daughter of the king. And so we are, oh my gosh, you are amazing. I need to know about you. And as your supervisor, as your mentor, as your father, as your um, mother, I am riveted by who you are and what you're about, right? So you're on the edge of your seat all the time when you're interacting with that person. So that begins a different path in your brain about the person, which enables you to empower them in ways that you couldn't before if you didn't have that fascination. So we start there, and then that opens your mind up to the ability to study. And what I'm referring to when I say study is not books. I'm not talking about opening some book on psychology. I'm talking about studying that person. What are they made of? What is their character? What are their values? How do they think? How do they communicate? And studying that and knowing it deeply, whether that's your spouse, your child, an employee, a peer, whatever. Start with the assumption they're fascinating, study them, and then you go to the next phase, which is giving them space to think. If we give people space to think, and I mean think, I don't mean talk. Talking is going to come from the thinking, but giving them space to think. In other words, we hold space for them to freely think without interruption. And it's one of the best promises we could ever give anybody in our lives, is to promise that we're not going to interrupt them, their thoughts, not their words, but their thoughts, because that's a different level of not interrupting. So when I show up to empower someone, to mentor someone, to be their boss, if I can give them the knowledge that they are safe to think, knowing that thought that they're having will not be interrupted, that's extremely empowering. It's one of the most empowering things you can do. So then you do that. And the fourth piece is you celebrate. You celebrate who they are. You celebrate what you know about them. You celebrate their thoughts, their ideas, their actions that they take. And make sure that they know that you're celebrating that. And you can do it in words, you can do it in actions, whatever way makes sense for that person. And since you've studied them, you know what's going to make sense for them and the way that you can celebrate them, because it's different for everybody. So those are, if you really want to empower people, those are the layers that I believe get you to a place where the person is truly empowered.
I love how you've systematized that. It makes it really, really easy, not unlike the behaviors you referenced earlier, where touching base with God between meetings, and having your Monday morning CEO meetings. The giving people space to think, I find really interesting, especially when I reflect on past versions of myself.
Mhm.
Now, I grew up in my young adult life in through really my 30s having a lot of success, Kyle, with speaking first, showing people how smart I was, and and being right.
Mhm.
And the business world tends to reward that type of assertiveness. What you're describing seems antithetical to that, where it's almost taking a position where you flip the default setting and say, no, we probably actually learn more if our position started with listening and then moving to asking questions, high quality questions,
Yep.
internalizing the answer for what it is, and serving more as a coach or a guide rather than a teacher or consultant. Am I capturing that
Yep.
right?
Yeah, 100%. And for the naysayers, I agree with the naysayers, and that is that this isn't always the way to go. You can't always be just asking questions and listening and expecting them to know. There is training, there is teaching, there is all that. You have to train a child up in the way they will go so they won't depart from it when they grow old, right? We have to do that. And it's very similar when it comes to in the workplace. There's training that needs to happen. But otherwise, if they've already got it, and they've probably got it more than we realize most of the time, that's when we need to shut up. I have an acronym which I won't go through because it'll take too long, but I call it the wiser way of listening. And the S in wiser is to shut up.
Yeah.
Shut up, shut down. Like shut down your thoughts. Get your thoughts out of the way and just be present to receive whatever it is that they have to say, and then be that place of comfort, that place of care, so that they can fully think.
Yeah, especially for that business professional or senior leader that has a fair amount of experience in business and industry. They certainly have enough life experience. It occurs to me that the goal isn't to cultivate knowledge. The goal is to cultivate agency and confidence in those individuals, and having an approach that allows them to come to their own conclusions, if that makes sense. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I describe it to business owners as if your employees are going home and they're thinking about your work and their work and talking about their work and their frustrations and all those types of things, and it's just on their mind and they can't get it off their mind in that way, you're not doing a good job of employing them. If they go home and they come back the next day and they've come up with a brilliant insight about how to do their job better, now you're employing them properly. And the difference is conscious versus unconscious. The conscious mind is the negative one, where their work, thinking about their work all the time, it's on their mind all the time. The same thing is true for business owners. You don't want to be always thinking about your work. That's not healthy. And so if the employee is like that, that's not very empowering. That's disempowering and frustrating. But if they go home and you've asked them really good questions during the week, and they're engaging in collaborative conversations and meetings rather than whatever meetings are nowadays, and it creates this innovation and creativity in their minds, and they sleep and their unconscious mind is working on a solution without them even knowing it, and they go to work with this beautiful solution. Now you've really empowered them, because you want to hire the unconscious mind. That part is the supercomputer that's going to move your business forward and make you profits in powerful ways. Plus, the employees are going to feel wonderful about their job because they're contributing in meaningful ways.
Kyle, this has been so interesting for me. I mean, I've been in business and industry a long time. I'm a credentialed person in the leadership space, and I got to tell you, brother, I've learned a ton just in this short conversation. So thank you very much for that. For our listeners, how can people learn more about you and your work?
Yeah, go to blueshirtcoaching.com and you can learn more about what I'm up to. You can also go to Blue Shirt Business Community on Facebook, and that's where I'm collaborating with a bunch of other business owners and having conversations and discussions about these types of things. So those are probably the two best ways to connect with me.
Wonderful. Kyle, before we wrap, would you mind closing us out in prayer?
Yeah, for sure. God, thank you that it is not my credit to take for the insights that you've given me, for the opportunities that you've given me, for the insights you've given Ed and the opportunities you've given him. Thank you for our families, that our wives put up with us and really empower us to run our businesses and to have the success that their role in that matters. I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for our kids, and I'm grateful for these listeners. I pray that you would touch the listeners' hearts for whatever it is that I said that you want to translate into their minds and hearts to impact them. I pray that you would. Thank you for the opportunity to be on this show. And I pray that the numbers of downloads would grow and that people's hearts and lives would be transformed and impact because of your spirit working on them. Thank you. And I praise you, and we're grateful for choosing us. Amen.
Amen. Kyle, thank you again for taking time. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
God bless. You can contact the show at itsnotmycredittotake.com. We'd love to hear from you. God bless.